Welcome back to another episode of Research Fantasy Presents the NBA Fantasy Baller DFS edition for Thursday, March 16th, 2017. And what can we really say about March 15th other than ouch? And I'm sure that's not an industry-wide thing because obviously I know that some of you out there probably did pretty well, and I could have, but locking Nemanja Bjelica in all of my lineups because I was convinced there was no way that he was not going to get less than 25 points, when in fact there was a way, and it involved him getting injured. Not to mention high ownership of Ivica Zubac, who just decided that when the Houston players were going for shots, he thought maybe they were trying to high-five him from his game the other night. Didn't work out well. Couldn't have played more than 12 minutes because he picked up 2 early fouls, came back in the game in the third, picked up a third. Probably 5 minutes or less through the third, he picked up his fourth, and I don't think he saw the bench. I think he came in late because I saw him score 2 points later in the game. So that was a recap of my night. We could further it by just going into our plays, and keep in mind that the mentality behind this was our tournament plays. So we weren't looking for guys necessarily with safe floors. We were looking for guys who we thought could exceed their upside, and we offered out Blake Griffin, who the Clippers just aren't right. I don't know what more to say than that. They're just not a fantasy viable team. I am scared because it bleeds to the other team as well, where the guys playing the Clippers just can't seem to put together strong fantasy games. So I'm scared as hell tonight to play any Nuggets, but I'm going to because you can't adopt that mentality. But I am absolutely petrified that this is another 96-95 game where the scoring is just spread out all throughout the box score. Dwayne Wade got injured at some point. I wish I could tell you when. I'm guessing it was the early third quarter. Really irrelevant. He played 22 minutes, coming up with 17-ish fantasy points. Even if he played his normal 32 minutes, he wasn't getting the job done. And that's sad because you could say whatever you want about Memphis, but that was a good matchup for Wade. We've seen shooting guards perform well against them. It just wasn't in the books for Wade last night. And then last, the theory behind Greg Monroe was there. Greg Monroe didn't do bad on DraftKings where we were specifically talking to him, but Jason Kidd is going to be an absolute... Jason Kidd is moving into Kenny Atkinson territory for me, where, I'm seeing Nets on the board to choose, and I'm just going to X him out. That's what's going to happen with the Bucks, because and we'll talk about him because I like him, but even at 4,400 or 4,000 with Karis LeVert from the Nets, where's the upside? Because he's only going to play 25 minutes because Kenny Atkinson feels the need to rest his team for what I have no idea. Why you rest the worst team in the NBA is beyond me. I mean, you talk about culture, and as far as I'm concerned, that is the least like a championship culture that there is in all of the NBA. It has nothing to do with their record, but how the players are being coddled while just being absolutely horrible on the court. It's just pretty much emphasizes everything that's wrong with America today. That's a different topic that I won't go into. But let's look at what the model says about tonight. It's a short slate, so naturally Russell Westbrook is playing because why not? I think in my article, researchfantasy.com, I mentioned I don't even remember the last time that Russell Westbrook was on a slate that had more than 6 games. I swear since at least the start of the year, the only time he plays are Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturday. I mean, it really does feel like that. It feels like you can never use Westbrook in a situation where you could really stand to benefit because you actually have a ton of value around him. Anyway, here are players that our projection system favors tonight. Brook Lopez, Paul Millsap, Elfrid Payton, Derrick Rose, Gary Harris, Dwight Howard, George Hill, Guillermo Hernan Gomez, Chris Paul, Rudy Gobert, Serge Ibaka, Russell Westbrook, Zach Randolph, Mason Plumlee, Evan Fournier, Marc Gasol, Draymond Green, Mike Conley. Those are all the guys 5,500 and above that are favored. Now, I will say this, and again, I'm considering adding, number one, an extra video each day that's just a game breakdown that isn't so much picks, but just how I see the game going. Like, here's the flow of the game that should happen. Here's the players that it should benefit. You kind of read between the lines to see what you think will happen. But I really do want to put up some content about projection systems and how to really make them work, because, you know, there's guys that show up in the projection system really high, like Chris Paul. I'm not going to use Chris Paul. He's playing horribly. I'm not going to use Blake Griffin. They're just not good right now. I learned my lesson. It was a great tournament thought, and there's copious amounts of videos from other guys who have better reputations than I do echoing the same sentiment about Blake Griffin last night. But I'm just not going to touch him. So I think the biggest part of a projection system is using the projections after you've filtered out who you just don't really feel comfortable playing. All right, with that whole preamble done now, let's move on to my favorite plays again today. Same mentality, not necessarily just restricted to tournament play, but we're trying to find pricing discrepancies, and typically I've been able to just find them a lot more often on DraftKings. Why is that more important? Well, DraftKings, you have one less position. So, you know, winning score maybe last night was around 340, 350. On FanDuel, it was 380. So you can see that extra position that would have been there that would have compensated for that 30 points. So you don't want to overpay for a guy on DraftKings. That's usually my first marker. If a guy is like considerably more on DraftKings than he is on FanDuel, I'm more or less going to walk away from him. If he's significantly less, then I'm like, all right, we have to talk. So let's start off with a guy who's 1,000 less on DraftKings than he is on FanDuel, and I'm talking about the shooting guard from the Toronto Raptors, DeMar DeRozan. 15-3 fantasy draft, 9-3 FanDuel, 8-3 DraftKings. So that $1,000 might only equate to about 5 fantasy points, but it equates to much more than that in terms of roster construction. An extra $1,000 is a pretty significant portion of your budget when you're trying to fit guys in. It takes you from having a $4,000 play who's questionable to a $5,000 play, which could be a guy that like just got into a good role. You know, it could be a situation where you have 4,300 tonight and you say, I want to use a guy like Karis LeVert, but you have 1,000 extra left to spend and you're able to go up to Will Barton, who I think just has a better opportunity for production. So DeRozan is going to be in a high tempo in what should be very close game between two playoff teams. He's been basically the center of this team. He hasn't really hit that value marker that we really want to. He's been in back-to-back blowouts. One, they were blown out. The next, they blew the other team out. So this is really the first chance we get to see them against a team that has the same skill level as them. You know Russell Westbrook in this game is going to do a ton of scoring, and Toronto's going to have to do something on their end, and they're going to have to turn to DeMar DeRozan. You aren't going to make me believe that any combination of Andre Robertson and Victor Oladipo are going to do anything to slow DeRozan down. So at an $8,300 price tag for someone who I think could end up with 50 tonight, I'm going to go there all day. Next up, let's go to Nikola Vucevic of the Orlando Magic, 13-7 fantasy draft, 7-7 FanDuel, 7-3 DraftKings. Not as much of a discount, but this for me was a situation where I told myself, if Vuk is less than 8K, he's someone I'm going to have to look into. We saw both. I mean, we saw all three of Dario Saric, Jahlil Okafor, and Rashawn Holmes basically dominate against the Golden State Warriors, who is the opponent of the Orlando Magic. The spread is 13.5 points. It was 17.5 points for the Sixers, who nearly beat them. It was 20 points against the Nets, who nearly beat them. The point I'm trying to make is this Golden State Warriors team looks like a 7th seed best without Kevin Durant. I mean, losing that bench power with Maurice Spates, as much as I hate to admit it, Leandro Barbosa, and then ultimately losing Harrison Barnes, who was nothing but a placeholder, but really could have helped out a lot more. They're just not a great team, and they're not good defensively, and we've seen them dominated in the paint. Zaza Pachulia is good, but they're only going to play him 18 minutes. They hate him. They're not going to play JaVale McGee more than 12 minutes, so they'll have James Michael McAdoo for 5 minutes, and then they'll shift Draymond to the 5, where he will not be able to compete with Nikola Vucevic. That's my opinion. I'm sure plenty of people will say something to the contrary, but I don't see it happening. I'm putting Vucevic's floor at about 35 points tonight. His ceiling, again, much like DeRozan, is into the 50s, because this is a guy who is the centerpiece of his team's offense. So we could be looking at a 25-12, 25-15, potentially 30-15 game with a couple of blocks, a couple of assists, and they're going to have some turnovers, but he's a guy I really like tonight to do well. The last guy I'm going to mention is the one I'm most excited about, and that's Gordon Hayward, small forward of the Utah Jazz, traveling to Cleveland to take on the reigning and defending champions. Hayward is 13 on Fantasy Draft, 7,800 FanDuel, 6,900 DraftKings. So again, here's a situation where his price is approaching. You need 39 points on FanDuel to hit 5x value. You need less than that on DraftKings, and then you start looking at the benefits. You've got extra points for three-pointers, less points taken away for turnovers. I don't see him being too much of a double-double threat, to be completely honest with you, but it's just a situation where I think this game is going to be more competitive. This is not the Detroit Pistons, who the Cavs just blew out. This is a 4th seed in the West. This is a good basketball team. It's someone who's actually built to give the Cavs a lot of trouble, because I think that they prey on the weaknesses. I'm not a believer in Tristan Thompson. On a whole, I think he's good in a vacuum, but we saw them exposed a lot of times when they were playing against teams like the Hawks with a big guy like Dwight Howard. I think Hayward is worth the risk. He's a guy I think you're looking at 35 to 42 points as a best case scenario, but you know, are you going to want to take that route in tournaments when I think you're going to see a lot of people land on Carmelo Anthony at an inflated salary? He's not really hitting that type of production. I liked him when he was 74. Now when he's 84, 81, now it takes a whole lot more, and I understand Brooklyn's bad, and I understand that Kristaps is out, but that doesn't mean that Anthony, he's admitted that his head's just not in it right now. You got to watch that. That's just a dangerous scenario to play with right now. Sorry this ran so long. I ended up espousing a little more than I really wanted to, but make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Head over to researchfantasy.com. Subscribe to our NBA mailing list. Head over to Facebook. Like us there. Follow us on Twitter at researchandwin, and join us again tomorrow.